All right, hello everybody. This is GM Jesse Cry, and we're back again for our monthly member game analysis. And a lot of beautiful games this week. Several games that definitely gave me a lot of food for thought, things that I needed to reflect on before I even, had anything intelligent to say. Let me begin by saying the usual spiel. The point of this show is to encourage members, chess players, to pursue an ancient mode of chess study. Let's call it a Soviet mode, but it could be it's pre-Soviet as well. And that is that the key to improving your games is to analyze them deeply. And so I've been doing this show for a while. Many people have been longtime submitters to the show, and I definitely think that those people, their play has improved. And I think in particular, just not just in terms of improvement, but the depth of play, the texture, the beauty it's become more interesting as a fan to watch these people grow and progress in their chess. So that's kind of just a side benefit for me as well. Now, several interesting games to get to today. Let me write in the chat box hello. And there's a real stunner that came out here. And when I first saw this game, I was prejudiced against it. It seemed wrong. But the more I looked at it, the more very interesting it became to me. So this is a user, Luke, who sent in this game. I don't know his opponent other than Ashley. I don't know what anything more really than that about this guy who played white. Definitely a brilliancy at least at some level here. Okay, and let's get into it. So let me get them wrong. There we go. So C5. See, I'm going to turn off the sounds here so we don't get any sounds. All right. So I want to say that the Sicilian is a dangerous thing. I played it for years, and I only played it because when I was a kid, I played the Carl and then a friend of mine said I had to be a man and push it one move further. That's how it happened. Things sometimes they happen in life for dumb reasons. So I did this thing, and I had no idea really what I was getting into. No one explained to me the problems and dangers of the Sicilian. So we're going to talk about it a little bit today. The big thing, let's just say this, is in normal Sicilians, black is down in time but has some structural advantages. So the idea of the smith-morra is to say, well, I want even more time. And in addition to that, if you take the pawn, I'm going to have long-term compensation on the D file and the C file. Let's say in general, I want to end up putting my rooks there. Now, let me say, there has been a lively debate since I was a kid as to whether the smith-morra is busted. And it's funny because there's all kinds of openings that people could get riled up about, but the smith-morra is one where people get truly excited, claiming it's busted or it's this or it's that. And the latest version is some 18-year-old kid published some analysis, I haven't even looked at it, about Esserman and how he had busted the smith-morra. And to me, it's just ridiculous to talk that way. Because for one, it's just a game. It's a very interesting position, like so many other gambits that you can play. And I think the anger comes from the sacking of a pawn and then not having absolutely clear compensation for it, i.e., compensation that you could understand in terms of a variation. Like, if he takes my pawn, then this, and this is going to happen. No, this is just compensation. I've got time, and I've got these D and C files. So, right, I think that's why people get angry about it. Because think about it. There's such a vast array of chess openings that you could get mad about. And I think the smith-morra is the one For some reason, the proles really get excited about it. Now, let me say one thing about the smith-morra that I really like, in just to contrast it with the regular Sicilian. Of course, there's many different flavors of Sicilian, but they usually end up with some kind of structure like this. And the problem that white needs to understand is that this pawn isn't participating in the central fight, whereas black's pawns are. And what they're going to try to do is try to constrict your minor pieces, in particular the knights. So for example, there's many different variations here. But let's say a6, bishop e2, e6. The knights, right? They're all their squares are gone. So black is making a claim that he has undeveloped the knights, even though they look developed. And I wish someone had told me that when I was a kid. I think I was consumed with like variations and yada yada, and I was playing this kind of madness. But that is the deeper idea of the Sicilian, which is very hard to play because you're going to get monsters throwing bombs at you, such as this game that we're getting. And the only point I wanted to make there is that by playing c3 and knight takes, you are alleviating yourself of that c2 problem, right? You're just getting rid of the pawn. Now, Luke writes that that maybe in retrospect he should have played knight f6, and I will show that. So knight f6 here. I think that's absolutely playable, and let's say fine. By the way, you are solving, if you play knight f6, you are also solving the question of what to do against the c3 Sicilian as well, because this will generally transpose. I think in my experience, it generally just always does. And another system we're going to look at, I think I'll do it in the very next game actually, is this thing that my friend Eugene Perelstein recommended, which seems really weird at first. But that is, well, we could start with c3 or g6, because c3 or d4, because they end up transposing, is this weird system here, which is, even though it looks so strange, is fundamentally okay. But like I said, we're going to get to that in the next game. Kinch Mind says, I played the Morra in a recent tournament and it totally broke my opponent mentally. He called it evil. I'm serious, bad karma, man. Hi, DC. How you doing? So I think it is true that there's certain openings you get crushed by, and it leaves such a mental impression on you. And this could definitely be one of them. Let me just say, I don't play the Sicilian anymore because it's just too dangerous in general, and because I got whipped so many times by, like, when you face a strong attacking player, they are going to put incredible pressure on you. So I don't play it anymore. But if I did, I would choose either knight f6 or Perelstein's g6 system. I would not take the thing. Okay. Now that said, I want to say, those of you who watch the show know that I'm prejudiced toward development, right? So that is just something that I would never want to be black and being down in development. So there's many different structures to play against the smith-morra. I'm sure a6 is fine. Notice that what you're really doing is you're trying to play as if it's a normal Sicilian and claiming that with a6 you're controlling the white pieces. Maybe true. Of course, it becomes more dangerous because you just gave white another tempo. Let me just say for the record that my recommendation, if I was going to give one, would be something like this. d6, bishop c4, knight f6. How does this go? Castles, knight f6, queen e2, bishop e7, rook d1, and now e5. You got to play e5 to prevent white playing e5 himself. And at first it seems like white's got something with a d5 square, but he does have to worry about bishop g4. I think this position is roughly equal. I had the honor of playing the great Mark Esserman some blitz games from this position just because I wanted to see what he was up to. He, of course, is the author of this book, Mayhem in the Morra, which I can recommend. That book, by the way, is kind of like a cult following. It's kind of interesting. And this kid who published some research is responding to that book. Anyways, h3 is possible, bishop e3. I don't remember exactly what he did to me, but I remember it was a timely b4 that messed with me. That was the issue where it got weird. Was the b4 move. Okay, so let's go back into the game. Really interesting game's going to be before us here. So bishop f4, d6, and bishop e2. And this was the first point where I said to myself, well, this is silly. This is silly to play bishop e2. Because my general sense of how to play the Morra has always been that you go bishop c4, castles, queen e2, rook d1, rook c1, and you start the party. Now, so bishop e2 is a way, I guess, to say that the bishop on c4 isn't that useful anyway. And this is the other part that's really interesting. And that you don't need the traditional queen e2 development square. All right. These I assume you're referring to Esserman. He did crush me in that game. Paul in New Jersey, you always submit great games. Stop saying that about yourself. Too self-deprecatory. So bishop e2 I was prejudiced against. And that led me at first to not take this game that seriously. But because it gets weird. Like knight c6, the guy plays queen b3. That also struck me as weird. But in hindsight, the queen has to find a square because the natural square bishop on e2 was just taken away from the bishop. It also was weird because normally white would castle first. But okay, it's probably going to transpose. So here we go, rook fd1. This was a novel setup to me. Queen c7. And here was another move where I was like, that's just that's just weird. Because to me, the natural move for white is simply rook ac1, and it feels like I have strong pressure because I'm going to be threatening knight d5. And those positions with knight d5 are generally pretty good for white. So maybe queen b8, and we have ourselves an interesting struggle, right? But that's, like I said, a more traditional way. And white's going his own way with queen a3. My suspicion, Luke, is that your opponent had already seen this kind of setup. And that this coming thing, this incredible thing that he's about to do to you, is something that he had studied with the computer. And also, these smith-morra guys, they take their analysis pretty deep sometimes, like the Mayhem and the Morra book. And we're going to see with this interesting move idea that white plays, that I don't even think it's necessarily winning or anything for white. It's just going to put incredible pressure on black. And that's one of the reasons I don't even want to play the Sicilian anymore, because in addition to this, there's many other ways that he can mess with you. Okay, so queen a3, why does it look weird? Because for one, this e5 move, we saw that earlier here. It's not that bad of a thing to play e5 anyway. And it seems like you are just encouraging e5, as happens now. Black plays e5. And what is the queen doing here? Really hard to say. Really spooky looking with the bishop over here. Well, white plays bishop g5. Black says d5 and essentially says, hey, white, it looks like you blundered. Honestly, that would have been my reaction too if I played this. Now, one thing, Luke, I wish you had said in the notes was just like, how long had the guy thought to get up to this point, right? Because if he played quickly, then maybe you should have smelled a rat. Because queen a3 is just such a weird move to put the queen opposite the bishop like that. Okay, so anyways, queen a3. Let's show the idea. Bishop f6. Beautiful. I think it's beautiful anyway. Okay. Bishop f6. Totally madness. You've got to take the queen, because otherwise we're just going to land with the knight. Now, one reason I wanted to ask is, I guess you could imagine that maybe he blundered into this and told himself that, well, if I go back here, I'm just gonna get a worse position after DE. For example, you can't do this because of this, and I'm taking this pawn. At least that's what I reckoned. Maybe not even that's true, but that's what I was worried about, and I can imagine him worrying too. So here we go. Snip. Snap. And here we got this wild position, bishop g7. And at first glance, it really doesn't look like white has enough. I mean, it really, really doesn't look. But let's go through some of the basics. The queen has to worry about the knight coming here. The rook is essentially dead, because on rook g8, we're going to get knight f6, knight takes, with check. With check. And it's obviously difficult for black to castle. If we win, obviously, say the rook, then we will have a rook and a piece for the queen, in which case we can maybe just say to ourselves, oh, we are fine. So, let's get into it. I think black's move is okay. I looked at this a while, and I usually don't turn on the computer, but this one I really did turn on the computer, partly because I felt like maybe white was in his own prep, right? Okay, so bishop b2, rook b1, queen a2, check to the miserable king. Now, one thing I respect about what white did here is, even if you do not know, or even if you do know exactly what's going on, you should always repeat. It's just totally cold-blooded to repeat, because it shows that you're in charge of the game. All right, so he does some more checks. And now watch what he does now. Bishop c4. And I have to say, I was like pretty stunned by this. Bishop c4, again a move I was like, what, really? So it's stunning, because there's this tension with the poor rook that's just being held, right? The rook can't really go to g8 without losing itself with check. So it's trying to say, okay, when you take me, you will lose a tempo. Now, the amazing thing that I'm sure Luke was suffering under is probably every move he's expecting white to just take the rook. And then if he had, actually, let's just say, if he had taken the rook, for one, my king has the square, which is really important. And two, I get my tempo, and maybe I'm out of dodge, right? So white must be fast. Queen takes, rook b2. Now, what's the obvious bummer? The bummer is that knight c7 is on the table. So again, this was a really bizarre position where it's hard to say what black should do with the poor guy. So he played rook b8, knight c7, check again, and now he snips. Okay, so let's take stock. It's an amazingly interesting position. Not surprisingly, the computer said it was equal, but in a practical game, that means absolutely nothing. One very interesting feature of the position, to me, is that this is an unopposed bishop. And a lot of times when you have material imbalances, it's really important to look for the unopposed bishop. And we're going to see that in this game. And all that means is that if white can get an initiative on the dark squares, let's light them up, then black will be in trouble because he's basically down a piece on the dark squares. And that is indeed how this game is going to end. So let's look. Bishop e6, simple chess, right? Very hard to make a move here. Very difficult. King f8, bishop f6. And that's rough beans right there with bishop f6. You can see what I'm saying now about the dark squares. Now, it's a little bit hard to give black advice, but I guess we're going to say that this queen a4 move, it feels weird to me. Like I'm not sure I get it. I don't know if I have a good suggestion. I'm just saying I don't necessarily get that move. So queen a4, get a tempo on the rook, and you can imagine black saying to himself something like, I'm fine. I'm fine. So knight b6. And let's read what Luke's note says. I wanted him to fork because I would happily exchange my rook for his pawn and bishop. Well, let's look. Queen e4. So he's saying knight c6, queen e5, and I live. But look at that move. Bishop f6. Ow. Ow. Yeah, DC. This game is incredible. I posted this on Twitter, by the way. It was like I have no skills with technical stuff. So it took me forever to just figure out how to do a GIF on Twitter. But I was so determined to make it happen that I made it. So I think it's all lost now. It's all lost. And the other thing about this that's funny is normally with these two pawns against, when you're just down one piece, you would have reasonable hopes of maybe drawing the game. And if you imagine these pawns weren't so firmly blockaded, we could imagine black holding the thing. But unfortunately, it's again really a tale of the dark square bishop, because the dark square bishop can hold all of the pawns advancing, because, as we know, in the opposite color bishop endings, the blockade can't be broken, i.e. I can stop the pawn from either going to a3 or a1 with my bishop, and also I can form a boundary to keep your king out. So let's just look at how that seemed a mistake, but okay. Actually, it's funny, maybe white shouldn't have even done that, but this is good enough. Yeah. So really great game. One thing that's terrifying for me, just as a chess player, is as this game was submitted, it says that Ashley's rating was 1900. It's like, if the 1900s are going to pull that out of their shoe, I want nothing to do with them. Really great game. Sometimes too, if I felt like, honestly, if a 1900 played that against me, I would be like, there would be part of me that would be like, oh, the guy's cheating or something, right? It's like some computer going on. And the sad news is that, you don't know these days. Maybe they are cheating. Anyways, I don't suspect that. Honestly, it feels like maybe Ashley had a lot of it prepped out, especially the way he repeated the position. But still, really beautiful game. And to me, it shows both some of the problems of playing black against with a Sicilian, but also the Morra, where some kind of bomb like this can hit you, and it's really hard to be fully prepared for that kind of thing. So yeah, really interesting game. But by the way, I'll just mention, since the last show, the Igor Rousey's thing hit. For those of you who don't know, this guy, Igor Rousey's, had a rating like mine, around 2,500, and then for years, and then suddenly jumped up. And, old guys like me dream of becoming better. He's like 2,500 FIDE forever, like I am, and then suddenly got up to almost 2,700. And everyone kind of knew that he was cheating. And just my personal connection to the story is, back in the day, in the 90s. I was playing for this German team called Viernheim, and we made it from the second Bundesliga up to the first. And who was playing on my team? This guy Rousey's. And yeah, it really breaks my heart because the guy, I liked him. I thought he was a cool guy, and all this stuff. And so it was a real bummer for the chess world. This guy did it, and I was in St. Louis when it happened, and we had a lot of discussions about it, like how often is it happening. I asked a bunch of other GMs, and some people, I asked. My question was like, okay, World Open, what percentage of the people do you think are cheating? And basically, depends on your level of cynicism, right? Some people are saying 1%, i.e., 1 out of 100. Other people are saying 2%, and already, that's just way too high of a number. Because if this guy was cheating, say Ashley, oh, how soul crushing. And then I shared his game on social media, it would just be a disaster. Anyways, I'd like to believe that this game was totally for real. Paul in New Jersey asked, was this an over-the-board game? I believe it was, yeah. Okay, so let's go into our next game. And so let's keep on the subject of, let's say, an smith-morra. Let me flip the board here. I should have flipped the board the last time. So here we go. And like our last game, this one's going to be a little bit of an opening questions. So Matt talks a little bit about the different systems, knight f6, and yada yada. As we've seen in our previous game, the c3 systems are very interrelated to the smith-morra systems. And you can get this against the smith-morra as well. And this setup was championed by my friend Eugene Perelstein, who wrote a really good book. I think technically, Gingy's on the cover as being a co-author, but I'm pretty sure Eugene did most of the work. And this is a surprisingly tricky move, d5, which is, I think if you learn how to play it, is a very good system. When I first saw it, by the way, I thought it couldn't be right. It felt like white was getting everything with his two beautiful pawns in the center. So, Vision, when you say the problem with that book, you mean Eugene's book, I guess. In any case, I think this is fine, and I think this move, e5, if I was white, I don't think I would do it. I would be too worried about getting a bad French, which is what we're going to be talking about now. I think if I was white, I'd probably take and claim to be mildly better after something like that. Nothing special, but maybe mildly better. So, e5, and now an interesting move that I don't like, or rather, it's probably objectively fine, but to me it doesn't feel right, and I think that a lot of the problems that Matt gets in this game are due to this move being a little bit too fancy, and that's a6. I'm going to turn on the air conditioner. Hope it's not too loud, but it's also just too hot here in Baltimore. So I'll try to talk a little louder. So the problem with a6 obviously is you are sacrificing a tempo. And the other thing is, just as a French situation, in general, you don't want to be worried about bishop d5 stuff. It's because that's not where the bishop wants to be. But let's say this is an odd French, of course, because our good bishop is hitting this rock. Okay, so just for my own 2 cents, there's more than one move here. I looked it up, and Eugene played this move, and maybe you are getting troubles after bishop g4 because your light squares will later be weak over here. So just my 2 cents on this is black should play knight h6, castles. If you need to, play f6, but you're going to be looking for bishop g4, knight c6, and depending on what white does, you can play either knight f5 or f6, knight f7. That was a lot of arrows there. Sorry about that. Yeah. Ben Feingold would cry. Why would Ben Feingold cry? Uh, would he cry about a6? Maybe he would cry about a6. I cry about a6 a little bit here. So, but let's look. So it's a fancy move, I guess you could say, designed so that black will get in knight c6. And you can claim, I think, as black, that the tempo doesn't matter that much because with e5, you've closed the position. Okay, many different moves here for white is one of the reasons I'm suspicious about a6. Knight c3, of course, and I think white should really start thinking strongly about Harry the h-pawn now. Like a6 should be our clue to start thinking about Harry. And we could do h4 now or after knight c3. But let's look at what white does. He's saying, I just got a castle. Okay. Now, Matt says he doesn't like f6. And then he should definitely should do knight c6 first. Because why did you play a6? You did a6 so you could play knight c6. Also, you did a6 so your bishop could go to g4, so no weird stuff happening on the light squares. But even so, white doesn't play a very inspired game here. So, castles, knight c6, and I'm not thrilled with rook e1 here. I guess I would like either bishop f4 or knight c3. White shouldn't fear the grabbing the pawn, black's grabbing the pawn on e5 yet because he's so underdeveloped. So here we go. Snip, snap, e6, bishop f1. This just feels too slow to me. Now black has, I think, good development. Matt writes that knight h6, f7 would be more normal. That might be true, but honestly, I think you've got a great French here, Matt. A great French. Bishop g5 was played and you gave it an exclam, but honestly, I love this position for you. I think this is beautiful. I don't see any clear way for him to mess with you, and yeah, I think you're doing great. So let's look. Knight c3, and here you do have to come up with a plan, and I think you're doing fine in this position. I'd rather be black, but it's here where things start getting a little funny. I think your first move, let's put your first move on the board and say it can't be bad. Now rook c1. Here, I think we have to start like asking some questions about what black should play. My personal sense is that h6 is the right move. Now, Matt wrote about black playing rook f5 with intentions of sacrificing the exchange. And all those intentions are correct. Those are things we should be looking to do. But imagine if we just played h6. I don't think we need to worry about our any weaknesses or anything over there. And we generally, yes, we would love to play g5 because then we're going to start thinking of bishop e8 and out. That at least is my first instinct as a French player. So h6, I think you're doing absolutely great. Now, let me just say that the reason this is the one you should whip yourself for, is this b5 move. Let me read to you what you wrote. Black needs to complicate the game. Why? You just play h6 and you're doing great. And b5 allows the bishop on f1 to spring to life after an eventual a4. I almost gave this move a double question mark because I spent a half an hour on it. Now, one interesting thing about that, Matt, is that I will say from experience, the moves that you spend the longest on are often the worst, right? And b5, it doesn't do anything. Right, there's nothing over there you can get. Like, let's say I gave you another move. Like, what would the next follow-up for b5 be, right? It's very unclear. So, it's a loss of a tempo, but also really important is, notice that you've got, in the French, you've got like a rock on c6 here. And what that rock does is it prevents all counterplay. And we're going to see that later on, that's a big deal in this game. So, b5, queen d2. And queen d2 is just a mistake because this sacrifice is now on. I think you could take it now. At least, maybe I'm missing some, but it looks to me like you probably are getting away with that right now. There might be some... actually, let me just double check. So maybe there's some weirdness. I kind of doubt it. But maybe there's a weirdness. I kind of doubt it, actually. But let's just see. With, like, taking on d5, is this going to be a thing? Maybe this is something I'm slightly worried about. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm slightly worried about this. In general, though, it's looking pretty interesting. Notice, though, that the reason this is working is because we played b5. If the pawn were on b7, we would have none of these problems. Queen d2 was controversial because it took our eyes off of f3. Rook c8, and he plays bishop h6. But honestly, it's a little bit hard to know what he should do. He should be worried about rook f3. And let's look at what happens. Rook f3, very good move. In general, I will say, if you want to be a French player, you should take on f3 without thinking too much about it. In a similar way, when you play the dragon, you want to be able to just, psychologically, you want to be able to play rook takes c3 at any given moment. The counterplay here is long term. Now, let me say one thing very important about this position to understand is the danger is actually you exchanging rooks. Black does not want to exchange rooks. I've talked about this principle before, and the idea is that White's got two rooks. They are doing the same thing. They're kind of bouncing off of each other. And, you know, we talk a lot about diversity these days in the media and whatever. And on the chessboard, diversity sometimes means a rook and a bishop versus two rooks. The rooks are essentially stronger pieces, but there are oftentimes positions where they're really hitting each other. If you get rid of Black's rook, though, it's just going to be a big fat rook against a bishop that can only touch the light squares. Right. So that's why this whole thing with rook c8, I didn't like it. All right, bishop e2, but you are fundamentally doing fine. And here you were against queen f8, but it felt at least positionally fine to me to play queen f8. You wanted to do like bishop h6 and knight f5. I also believe in your position there. Let's look at what you did, though. Here's where it really gets weird. That on queen g7, you played king g7 instead of queen g7. That to me is weird that happened. I don't get it, and I guess this is just a guess, that you wanted somehow to keep the pressure on this pawn. But here, queen g7, I think you have fantastic long-term counterplay, like in the sack, when you sack on c3 in a dragon. And the only real problem I see is, like, can white get some play either with a4 or with trading the rooks? In general, we want to play rook f8, right? King g7 is really going to make things a lot harder. Let me stress that when you get a crazy position like this, it's, the volatility factor is really going to shoot up. So one mistake is going to make it harder because your pieces are loose, especially because of the b5. I guess it's the pressure on f3. But let's think about the f3. If it was our move and we could play knight takes f3, would we do it? Probably not. That pawn is terrible for white. And this bishop's terrible. I don't want to give him my beautiful knight. That's my best piece, right? No, I don't want to take that thing. And I don't want to free the rook. I want to keep this bishop there. Okay, so this poisons our position, unfortunately. f4, knight c4, check. Centralized queen. And now we should at least consider queen f6. We're not afraid of the endgame, right? The endgame's our friend over here. Our king is better, we have good compensation, and the only thing we have to worry about is that if he can open the c-file. So that I would give a question mark to. Now he's pushing us back. And now look at that. I also was uncertain about knight b6, right? Because now it's just dominated by this pawn. Let me read to you what you wrote. My instinct at the time was that black ought to be finished here. Knight b6 is awfully passive. Black has no active breaks and is down material without enough compensation. On the other hand, it's not so easy to bring it home with white. White is also without a pawn break. Good, and I want you to see that even though knight b6 is really a strange move, like I don't understand why you wouldn't go knight d6. Even in this position, you still have loads of counterplay, and he's got things to worry about. So, queen d2, and you give that an exclam, but honestly, you know, it's no big thing. Queen h6, in principle, good. We want to bring the rook to the c-file. Rook cd1, bad, right? And you're right, abandoning the c-file. Absolutely. And that, like I said before, white's main positional objective here would be to exchange the rooks on the c-file. So the obvious question to ask for white is, can I play a4? And if you push me, move my knight somewhere, I don't even know where to go yet, but claim that you're like, let's say knight a2, a5, and say you're never getting out of dodge, right? You're never getting out of dodge, i.e. I will exchange a pair of rooks. And once that happens, it really will become evil because that rook is going to swing around. Black's dream is to get the rook here and to get the rook here and say, I'm golden. And again, I think pay attention to the fact that you didn't need the queens on to get the counterplay. It isn't just about attacking the king, this sacrifice. Let's look at that again, actually. I thought that was real interesting with queen d4, that you did not just play queen f6. You know? Yeah. If I'm white, honestly, I think I'd go queen a7 or something. But he could have done that in the game as well, right? It's not like we didn't prevent that by going king g8 either. Okay, so here we go. So, queen h6. Now, you gave rook f8 a question mark, but I'm glad that it's there on the board. Black is in some time pressure, but I'm going to say you have full compensation here. And the main thing that you should be focused on is fixing this knight. Although it's not immediately obvious how, right? You write that queen h4 was better, absolutely. But queen f8 is, let's call it thematic. Notice that your pawns are really wrecking these two minor pieces. Rook e3, d4. I'm not sure about d4, by the way. In fact, I'm very unsure about d4. Think about the position this way. White isn't actually doing that much to you at the moment. And d4 is freeing both the knight and the bishop. Now, I assume actually with d4 that there was a miscalculation, i.e. you thought you were winning something. But in general, as a positional thing, you really don't want to play d4 because your main compensation is just that these pieces are all tied down. So even if you played a mellow, let's say you're in time pressure, the mellow move to make is just queen f6, right? And then to try to improve this guy when you get the chance. Yeah, and we can think about all kinds of things after that. You know, the game's going to go on. Other moves besides queen f6 as well, of course. But the point is just to say that he's not doing that much. You could even go all the way back. you've got a structure, right, that you're playing. So I'll show this d4, rook e4, and then black blunders in time pressure with d takes c, and instead, I guess we have to take, but then I'm going to say, I just want to talk about it. The rook is gone, your key piece, and both of the minors now have become, white's minors have become amazing. So, right, we should even consider going back. That's our best move. But notice, this is our position has now become very loose. Yeah. Okay. Whew. That was a good one. Matt, let me give you, let's just say, I think this is an example where studying the openings too deeply can get you into trouble, right? Like, I think you had some very refined notions that you got from these super GMs who played a6, and it became difficult for you to follow through later on in the position, even after your opponent didn't play the best moves either. But almost, actually, another thing about a6, it's a weirdness, and this happens to everyone, not just you, even myself. It's like when you play this weird move in the opening, and maybe you don't feel like you totally understand it, later you're going to tell yourself, well, why did I play a6 if not to play b5, right? And then you'll play b5 thinking that it was part of some plan that the super GM intended, but actually it was a horrendous move, right? So, yeah. So, I'm trying to follow the Twitch and talk at the same time. I'm doing my best. Okay, let's move on to our next game. We're going to talk about Vishnu here. And Vishnu had, I was originally going to start with this game actually, and then I got caught up in the Morra thing. It was too intense. And the reason I was going to start with this game was I felt it was the kind of position where I actually could say something intelligent about it based on my own personal experience. So, to get in the mood, I'm going to turn off this loud air conditioner and get into this interesting position that we got. So, Vishnu's been on the show a bunch of times. He's generally a very strong attacking player, and his openings sometimes aren't attacks. So, we're going to get this kind of thing, which is very popular now, with bishop e3. And one of the things with bishop e3 is that you are basically trying to claim that you're going to be a little bit better in the endgame after, say, queen a5, queen d2, takes, and yada yada. So, and we're going to get something similar to that here. All right, castles, queen d2, takes, knight c6, and now rook d1, which Vishnu criticized. So you could say rook b1, of course. And let's just say the general notion that White's playing with here is that eventually I will play d5 and claim that I have a better center. In addition to that, though, I might have play on the king side, and that's the key insight that I want to later come to. So even though we're going to go into an endgame right away here, I think the general ideas are going to be similar regardless, whether we go into the endgame or not. And what I mean by that is White needs to understand that he has what can be seen as a majority on the king side. So, rook d1, I feel at least it's a natural, good-looking move to me. We need to clear the diagonal, and the rook will be useful behind the pawn. So the computer or something might say rook b1 or rook c1. This feels fine to me. And Black's reply, queen a5, definitely doesn't feel like a challenge to that move. All right, now let's get into it. This is an interesting position, and Vishnu takes on a5 and gives some notes about bishop e2, which are also interesting. I think that this is kind of, well, this is the situation that white is playing for in this opening. And that is to be better in the endgame. And before I go deep dive on this kingside majority thing, maybe even a more instructive thing to remember, maybe I'm the one who's wrong here, by the way, but to my mind, this is really very fancy, bishop b5. And a6 is for sure what black wants. Let's say something obvious. We're going to talk a lot about white's plans, but black's plans are very simple. The guy wants to play with a queenside majority, and it isn't just about getting a pawn to the other side of the board. It's about gaining space and key squares with those pawns and hoping that that will be enough compensation to fight against the immense central control that white has. And that's just a common Grunfeld. In fact, I would call this the Grunfeld structure when you get this kind of business. Kirschmein says that Rubinstein played this. Yes, there is some famous games with the bishop b5, but here, let's just say black wants this square. So a6, b5 is certainly something he wants. Now, I want to say this. There's two weird things about this. So the first is just play bishop d3, I think. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I think it's bishop d3. But the reason I want to say that, and we're going to come back to, let me come back to bishop d3, is that in this position, why are we castling? I really don't get it. Why wouldn't we play king e2? Our king wants to play in the center. Right? Why are we putting the king on the side of the board? I don't see any problem with the king over there. So, yeah, king e2 feels really natural, and that's why on bishop d3, I think what we're saying is I'm going to play king e2, and I'm going to have central play and some play against the king side as well. Right. We're going to talk more about this. So bishop b5, rook d8, I like a6 better. Castles, I like king e2 better. Bishop d7, okay. So we have a fundamental problem now. If we trade, we relinquish the c4 square, and if we go back, we relinquish a tempo. So we trade, and now rook c1. We not only for the file, right, but to control this square. b5, very good. d5, very good. Knight c4, bishop d4. Okay, so far so good. And black has some interesting question marks here. But let's just go ahead and play what he did, bishop h6. Now here's where I wanted to offer some what will hopefully be some insight. When you play rook c2 here, what I feel you doing is I feel you playing on the queen side. But you've basically already lost the battle on the queen side, right? You can no longer, a4 is never going to do it anymore because he's totally on lockdown. So when you play rook c2, think about it. If you don't somehow crack the knight on c4, you're not going to touch the thing. So my move for you to consider is rook cd1. And what I want to point out is that the position's probably roughly equal. But long term, what you need to understand is there are several points in this game where you didn't go after the black king side. And it's a funny thing, and it's a little bit anti-intuitive, but that's what we're going to talk about. And I want to maybe show you one more example before I show you a sample game. And in this sample game, it's just a game that I discovered years ago, which helped me understand what I think is the dynamic of this position. So let me show you one more example of where I feel like you're not playing against the king side. And let's say something obvious. There's two sides of the board. There's a strong side and a weak side. You are stronger on the king side. So you have no business over there on the queen side anymore. Unless you can take him out over there, you're not doing anything. So rook cd1. Okay. Now, rook cd1 was better. Let me just show you this other example. King f8, definitely a weird move. The computer showed you f5, and I want to even mention the move f6, dominating the knight. Both of those are, I'm going to say, classic Grunfeld ideas, right? Yeah. Now, so what black is going to do by shuffling his pieces for the next couple moves is he's going to give you some chances to get back in the game. So king f8, knight e5, good move. Get rid of that thing. That was a huge mistake, I think, to let him exchange off that piece. King e8. Okay, so here we go with rook b1, and I'm going to say I don't like it because, again, I feel like you're playing on the wrong side of the board. Right. So we're going to get back to this position. I want to show you a game that turned me on to what I think you should be looking at here. It's a totally different opening, and at first it might seem totally weird. By the way, actually, we were talking about the Sicilian Dragon Accelerated. If you play the Accelerated, you will have the problem of sometimes facing this business. And nothing to fear, but we're going to see the problem is, of course, the space advantage. Keres championed this weird bishop d2, queen e3 thing, and we're going to get this endgame where it's pleasant to be white. So knight d5, and here we have the fundamental sense of the game is set, where white is stronger on the king side. But you could ask yourself, let me just put it in my own words. When I saw this game, and there's other games like this, that it looks like there's nothing to do on the king side, right? It looks optically like, well, what are we doing on the king side? We have nothing going on there. And it looks, on the other hand, like black is completely secure on the king side. For example, he can put his pieces here on the dark squares and totally solidify his position. So that's what he does. Bishop c3, knight c5. So now notice that in the next couple moves, Keres does not mess with the queen side. Rook dc1, and now check it out. The point of rook dc1 was to get him to commit to that side of the board. And I'm sure black felt secure here. Look what happens. g4. So, like your game, black has achieved, a blockade on the queen side. Unlike your game, black's not doing that much here. Like, there's no big, deep plan I think that he can do. But I think fundamentally he's okay here. It's just white is putting some pressure. h4. Now, one key thing I want you to see is that in a lot of ways, the piece that we're playing against is the king on f8. It's true that the bishops are cool, right? But in this position, the knight on c5 is just really a great piece. It's hard to argue that like the bishop on b5 is better than the knight. So the piece we're trying to make bad is the king on f8. King g2, g5. So here we go, and we've managed to create what might be a weakness, but here we're going to get a key decision from white here. Bam. Rook c1. And this was amazing. So that was an endgame decision to say that I'm beating you in the endgame. And there's a lot of analysis in this position. But definitely after this, what we're going to see is the invasion and the stronger side on the king side. Really cold, actually. and then white goes on to win this game. So let's just go and just say, like, when you first see this game and you see the move g4, at least for me, I'll just put it in personal context. It's like, what? What is it that we want over there? What is it exactly that we're doing? And to a certain extent, it's abstract. And the only way that I think it becomes interesting is to say two things. That's my strong side of the board, and I'm playing against this guy. Not necessarily to mate him, that might happen, but to make it so that he can't participate, right? That it'll be a dysfunctional piece. In the same way we can play against pieces when we say, I'm trying to, make a piece ineffective, right? I've got my spindrift for the long afternoon. Let's go back to Vishnu's game. All right, King E8. Rook B1. Like I said, I wasn't thrilled. Rook C6. And okay, King F1 can't be bad. But like you wrote, H4 is stronger. Trying to create a weakness. So very similar to the game I just showed. King D7, Rook C8, King D3. You see what I mean? You're going to the wrong side of the board. Though your opponent, really, let's be fair, has given you loads of opportunities to improve your position and has not pursued anything on the queen side, right? Again, we should be thinking of advancing on the king side. H3, right? Advance! Advance, Vishnu, advance! It's yours to play on the king side. And he eventually does this, and I'll read. And he offered a draw here, which my team captain asked me to accept. I had only 2 minutes left, and so he did it. So one of the reasons I really thought this was an interesting game was from my own personal experience. This game by Karas, by the way, it's like Karas Legnol. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but you can see the name there, Levente Legnol, a famous old Soviet player from back, like, I don't know, 1960 or something like that. There's many games like that you'll see in modern play, and there's some great Fischer games too where he plays G4, G5 to just put a smush, let's call it a smush, onto the black king. You'll remember maybe a lot of Fischer games. There's in the Rui we go H3, knight H2, knight G4 as a maneuver. You'll see, and part of that idea is that if you take the knight and I go HG, I'm going to get that G5 push. A lot of arrows there. Sorry about that. Okay, good. Let's go on to our next game. And what do we got here? We've got Door. This is a pretty exciting game. So we're going to flip the colors. Okay. E4, D5, D4 takes F3. Kind of interesting. Kind of interesting. In principle, I want to like this because what we have, of course, is a mirror image in some ways of the ideas of the smith-morra gambit, especially if this were taken. And here, this could even become more evil if black lets it with the rook landing on F1 and whatnot, right? So that's the intention. But black, I think, correctly declines. And this is a difficult move to deal with because the move that white plays doesn't offer white anything, right? Still, here's an interesting question. Do you take on F3? And my fundamental intuition would be no, to rather just play knight c6. Because, first of all, it costs him a tempo to take the thing. And yeah, no, don't take that thing. We're giving him a tempo. And kind of a weird comment here, Dora, you write, I was happy with the outgoing, or I guess we mean with what happened, because I was closer to a draw. His king can't castle, and he has an isolated pawn, and he's not that much up in development. Well, bear in mind, he's not up anything in development here, right? So don't take that pawn. Actually, if you want to give yourself 1,000 lashes, Dora, this is the move maybe to do it on. EF. Okay, knight f3. Bishop g4, bishop h5, bishop d3. I'm not sure that move makes sense to me, because especially since black wants pressure with knight c6, it would make sense to be able to fight it with bishop b5. So a simple move for white here, I guess, would be bishop f4. Right? It's not clear that the bishop wants to go to d3. Right? Okay, so knight c6, good move, good move. I think that's also a good move. And now white gets himself in trouble with king e2. And I think, I just believe here that you've got to be much better. And you write, here I thought my opponent must take the knight with bishop g6, and I was happy to get 2 bishops. Now, it is true, if he played bishop g6, let's just say that position is great, not only because of the 2 bishops, but, you know, the light squares are truly tender. You know, if he moves this pawn, for example, something like that is going to hurt. So I think you're doing great, and I think on this move, bishop g5, I don't think that he can get equality with this move. Okay, let's do a couple of variations here. So the first instinct is rook e8, but then we got to worry about g4, knight e5, gh, and there doesn't seem to be a clear way to exploit this discovered check. At least I couldn't find one. Okay, so we don't have that. The other thing we could do is bishop f3, knight f3, rook e8. And that, I think, seems like you are going to be better. Because, let's say he takes this thing, bishop f4, I assume either bishop d6 or f6, and you've got everything under control. So I think, in hindsight, what you have to say to yourself is that bishop g5 freaked you out, right? Because the next move that earns 1,000 lashes is going back, right? Then, you know, things have definitely gone wrong. Of course, another move you could consider, I like this, I think I like this less anyway, is knight d4. But in any case, you know, you don't want to have to move back. And just as a general rule of thumb, like, you know, everybody's going to be surprised over the board. But you want to, when you have a situation where your pieces are going to do something they don't want to do, that's when you really want to pause and try to make something else work. Like, I think bishop f3 and rook e8 makes a lot more sense. And maybe, actually, that what's going on, I hadn't thought about it now, but I think what's going on is probably your prejudice against giving up the 2 bishops, right? But obviously the 2 bishops are worth less than time, and it's just not just the pawn you're getting, I think, but the king on e2 has his own problems. Okay, so knight g7, g4, bishop g6. And by the way, did he have to play g4? Maybe. Well, he does. No, I don't. I think he needs to do something with his poor king, like king f2, right? Because g4, you do get this bishop check to the miserable king. It's hard for white to know exactly what to do, but his development, you know, is so strong that we have to believe in white here. The simple move to make would be something like either probably one of these rooks to e1. Okay, bishop f5, and it looks right, but Dor finds a nice move here. Snip and rook e8, kind of the idea that we were looking at before. And even though black has is kind of a scrunch in development, it's white's king that has problems here. Black tried f6, and now we are going to win this pawn. This seems terrible. That's got to be winning for black here, because not only are you up a pawn, but your pieces are totally amazing. And in contrast to the bishop on f6 that we saw in Luke's game with the Smith-Morra game, this one isn't that impressive. So in this position, you did something that was either a genius move or it was a blunder. We'll see. But I don't think there's any reason to take any big risks here, right? You're not just up a pawn. You have other things going for you. So if you moved the knight to g6 or you took, I think you're doing great, because the guy has no real counterplay. Okay, but let's look at what you did, because it's definitely interesting and probably good enough. So rook e6, it's a complicated move because you are going to go down this path, which it looks on the surface winning, but then there's this knight b3 thing, which you said came as a surprise to you. Now, the interesting thing, one of the reasons this game was so fascinating to me are these positions here. And let's just put white's next move on the board and pause to reflect on it a second. I'll read what you wrote. Pretty ugly imbalance. I have 3 pawns and a rook for 2 knights, so I'm probably leading, but my f and h pawns are super weak. Luckily, this game was played after a game between Sam Shankland and Jeffrey Zhang from the Summer Chess Tournament in St. Louis that you annotated, so I knew this is hard for white, or in your words, Jeffrey can start massaging him. But unfortunately, that game ended in a quick draw, so I wasn't able to see the technique for playing such positions. It's hilarious because let me see. Actually, I think I can get this kind of quickly and talk while I'm doing it. Sam had 2 games with the 2 rooks versus the knights, or excuse me, a rook versus 2 knights from that tournament, and I thought it was a beautiful game that Howell beat him with a Berlin. And maybe I'm going to try to pull that up here just real quick. Yeah. And I'm going to just start another thing here. So let's see if I can get this going. Wait a second. And now is this board start PGN. Yeah, this was a great one, and let's just put this up on the board. Maybe we'll show a nice trick here. We'll flip it for aesthetic purposes. Sam played f5, and here's a nice shot. Knight h4, check to the miserable king, bishop f4, and you're getting mated if you don't give the rook. King h3, snip. Now, on the surface, it seems like this is completely lost for white, but Sam made it complicated by putting pressure on the g7 pawn. This is, black is Howell, by the way. This is in the same tournament, the Summer Chess Classic in St. Louis. And look what we get. We get our old friend, the rook g2. Now, what I want to stress, we were talking about this before. Rook g2 is a very simple and great move. Remember what I said before about when you got two rooks versus a rook and a minor, you want to trade off the rook, and that's because your two rooks, the black two rooks, are kind of duplicating each other, whereas the diversity of white's rook along with the minors can become dangerous, effective. And so we want to get that white rook off the board, and rook g2 basically assures us that we will get it. So let's look at how this goes. Snip h4. And so this is an interesting position to think about in terms of your game, right? Because we're going to get this coming position here, and in the analysis people were saying that white could have held this thing. I thought it was totally toast pretty much the whole time, but you can see that this actually has a startling resemblance to what you have, right? You had the two extra pawns on the queen side, plus another extra one on the king side. And so let's just look at the massage here. It is very difficult for white to live through this. I think on a practical level, I think it's toast. That's my sense. Just massage the guy to death. At some point, we're going to get our b5 in. We're in no hurry. We just keep going around and around. This is why, to be a professional chess player, it's so rough, man. So rough. They're just going to massage you over and over, and he finally resigns. So, yeah, poor guy. We're going to get b5 and b4 in, basically, if he moves the knight. Yeah, that was a great game. That game, by the way, I'll just reference it again, is Shanklin versus Howell 2019 if you wanted to look it up. But that was a classic game, I felt, for understanding the dynamic that we're going to get here and why, at least intuitively, I believe that this is winning for black. So it's a bonus for us that we have the pawns on the king side. Not just the extra pawn, but the fact that, let's say even if this guy were gone, if this guy were gone on f7, I would still believe that black is much better here. Probably winning, especially on a practical level. And the problem is that the knights are a real bummer of a pair, right? They really are worse than the bishop and the knight, and especially in a situation like this, because the knights, first of all, if you got rid of all the pawns, you can't lose. I guess that's the first obvious thing to say. But second of all, they're slow. So like in that game, they had trouble going from side to side of the board. And here, in order to deal with the potential weakness of the h-pawn, they're going to have to cover ground because they have to watch the queen side as well. So f6, rook b6, knight e3, a5. Now, c4 was a good move, and you wrote that maybe you like b5 better. It's kind of an interesting question here too, about what we should do. Let's just say that was okay. Let's also say that a5 was fundamentally okay. I'm not totally sure what b6 does. Yeah, I'm not sure what b6 does. And because knight d5 is going to come a little bit with a threat, it worries me. King b7, snip. Now we're getting closer to draw territory. And now we did ourselves a real disservice, right? Because we just killed our rook. Howell would truly howl if he saw you play this way with your rook. What are you doing? That rook wants to wander free. He wants to explore new territories, visit things in the world, see the sights. He's stuck behind the rook. Thank you, Vivi Fan Fan, saying you owns my book, Lisa. I wrote hard on that book. If you guys want to read a chess novel, look it up. So that was something, obviously, happened wrong in that position. Notice, too, when you well, so it's here where I feel like you lost the thread, right? Because you played, I guess, b6 with the intention of playing king b7, but it's not clear that your king is going to be a worthy hero on that side of the board, or why b6 is a thing that you need to do. So let's just say, obvious first question for me would be, how about king d7? It's obviously a little complicated, and we don't want to get our pieces forked, but something like this seems pretty interesting. And maybe king e5, and then maybe not king e5, but very soon we want to play a4. Okay. At the very least, the simple thing to say is that this didn't help you that much, and then rook h5 really didn't help you. Now he should be, close to being able to draw. I didn't understand that. I didn't understand that. Okay, he's trying to triangulate you. But look, what he should say to himself is, I am willing to give up my pawn on h3 to win the pawn. It's not like there's that much going on. Okay, now this should be a draw. This is kind of weird. And right, you wrote knight takes a4, probably draw. Absolutely. That's going to be a draw. You're going to lose the pawn, and actually, wait a second. This one isn't that simple, because there's a pretty standard problem here where the knight is cut from the white king, and if the knight were closer to the king, say on c2, anywhere near the king, this would be easily a draw. But when he's shunted away from the king, I think it's actually probably lost, because it's very hard for this knight to come back, like king c4, knight f4, and I'm already worried like that the knight's gone. Knight e2, rook f2, for example. And that's a very useful thing to know, actually, is that the knight, instead of trying to calculate it out whether you're going to win the knight, because it can become very complicated, is just say to yourself, if I can keep the knight from coming back to his man, that it's lost. Now, I didn't do that great of an analysis here, I'm going to admit. I'll be the first one to admit. But there was a lot of moves that white played that I didn't get, so I didn't go too deep into it. And now rook b3 is going to win the game. Yeah. So, really interesting game. And my sense is right, that especially after that weird rook h5 thing, that it should be pretty easily holdable for white. I love that imbalance, and I think a rule that I discovered late in my chess life that has really helped me is just to say simply that the rook's power in relationship to the two minors. Now you can imagine there's going to be loads of exchanges in your chess career where you're going to get a rook for two minors. And in general, that the rook's value in relation to the two minors is going to grow drastically as the game progresses. In the opening and early middle game, it's almost always a bad idea to give the rook up for the two minors, because the minors can jump all around in a cluttered position where the rook can't. But once we get an open position, that rook is a beast, as you saw in that Howell-Shanklin game. Right. And actually and you referenced the other one, the the Shanklin-Jeffrey Jean game. And I was surprised that was so quickly a draw. I thought maybe there could have been more of a massage. Okay. Let's go on to the next game. I believe we are now on to Paul in New Jersey. Here we go. French. Pesiku writes that Lengel was a Hungarian player. Indeed. Thank you for noting that. I should have noted that myself just from the name. I hung out in Hungary myself for a while, so I should have been aware of that. So, all right, let's get into it. This is a pretty spicy variation, and maybe the easiest way for me to talk about it is to say that Black has made a sacrifice in that he has given up his good dark square bishop, but you can argue that the queen on e7 is a powerful attacking force. Okay, not attacking force. Let me take that back. Is a tempo. Another very dangerous weapon for white is h4, which is a move I also didn't get as a kid. And first of all, black shouldn't take the pawn. And second, it's just, let's just say something obvious. White's going to be owning the king side, and black is going to be fighting for the king side, queen side. And h4 is just always a reasonable move to start advancing your interests on the king side. Anyways, this is fine too. Bishop e7, queen d2. I think a6 is maybe mildly better instead of castles, but okay, it's going to be a similar idea. And here, knight b6 is interesting, but I think fundamentally a little funny. So let's say some obvious things. Opposite side castling, the tempos are really going to count, and it's going to be about who can get an advantage, an initiative against the other guy first, right? So I've been asked actually to do like a thing about the how to play against the French or something like that. And so I'm going to maybe get that. Hopefully, if I'm not too lazy, I'm going to get that video series going soon. And this would be a position where it's just good to know as white just kind of what you're looking for. The drawback, by the way, of knight b6 is it's unclear if black's going to be able to bring more force than that to bear against the white queen side. So a more to me, the more natural move for black is a6, b5, and start the party, and then play maybe a knight b6 later. These French positions are beautiful and are very fun to play, and one of the reasons why, if you're a Sicilian player, a lot of times these French positions are nice because they give you the drama of the Sicilian without getting whacked by like we saw Luke get whacked in his game. In any case, you see my point. We want more force with a6, b5 onto our assault on the white king. It really is a race. Who can start the initiative first? Whoever starts the initiative first will be able to dictate the tempo. And if the machine starts, the machine of the initiative, before white gets to black's king, it's going to be bad news. So knight b6. And now g3. I'm very critical of g3, Paul. You say, so far this is a pretty standard French defense. I didn't know the best way to proceed here. I considered king b1, dc, g4, and h4. Right. And this move, the crime of this move is that, well, first of all, to understand that you're under pressure here to create drama against black, like immediate drama. He, on the other hand, it's not quite clear how he's going to bust you yet over here. Like, I don't think knight c4 is a threat yet. So he's got his own issues, but if you give him enough time, he will eventually come at you over there. So the other thing, though, I don't like about g3 is later on you play bishop g2, which suggests to me that your intention was to play the bishop there, which we can't. We just can't because we're allowing this beast into c4. It's like if he gets the beast to c4, then we're really toast. We are absolutely, completely toast, yeah. Notice both sides have castled onto the weaker side. White is weaker on the queen side, black is weaker on the king side. So the initiative is going to be especially nasty. It's going to be nasty anyway if opposite sides castling, but you see what I mean with the sides, right? Black really owns the queen side. So the move I think you can play, if you wanted to be fancy, you can play some other move. But just in general, the move to play, if you didn't want to think too much, would be h4. And what are you doing? You're activating your rook. You're going to smush him down there, and then we're going to see. G4 may be interesting, but notice you're not really in a position yet to play f5 because your center will collapse, right? With CD and then this guy going. It's a thought, but really, play this first. See how he reacts, and then go from there. The rook with h4, you're also introducing later notions of maybe a rook lift. So 30,000 lashes, Paul, for g3. I don't like it. So, and now more lashes for that one. Now, one thing to take away from what happened in this game is that tempi are always important, but sometimes they're more important than others. And probably the most obvious example where tempi are important is opposite sides castling. And when we talk about tempi, we're talking really about how can one player bring force to bear against the opponent's king, right? And that's a lot of force right there. That knight is a beast. Snip, very simple play, and my guess is that black is now winning. Now maybe there's other moves to play here. You could start with rook fc8. Honestly, there's no rush now for black. We might as well play rook fc8. And the only possible drawback with queen b4 is as you noted, this queen c5 move might become a possibility for you to try to save the game. I still think it's trouble. We'll look at that in a second. So a5 and a3 really is its own form of terrible, but I want you to see that you're actually already in big trouble here. Probably lost. Because even if you play queen c5, as you noted, you're not really threatening to take on b4. For example, even if I played b6, takes, it looks to me like this thing is just trouble, and then you're going to be much, much worse. And you can see here that the attack for black will continue even after the queens have been exchanged. Maybe there's some other way for you to play, and I definitely think that your position is so dire here that that you should definitely try queen c5 anyway, right? Even if you lost a pawn, because the build-up that black's got going up on you is so intense. And if anything, I think a situation just to remember is that whenever you see even the possibility of opposite sides castling just happening on the horizon, right? Maybe you're not even there yet, but you see it happening on the horizon. A little red light needs to go on in your mind that says, oh, the value of time just went up. And so, for example, I think with g3, bishop g2, and queen f2, we're all basically 3 tempi for black, and especially letting the knight in on c4. Now black should be winning, just on on principle. So let's look at how things went. And now we got to say it's lost. Bishop f1's at least tricky. And here's funny that you wouldn't play bishop f1. And let's just see, is it true that black really had nothing better? It seems surprising to me because the rook isn't really threatening some big discovery, right? Maybe I'm wrong on this. Let's just look for half a second here for black, because it really would be a bummer for the guy if this were true. Let's look closer at this. If this is true, then a3 might be considered an absolutely genius move. Rook d3, yeah. Queen c4, bishop f1. Now, he can go to f5 here, so that's one out. And in general, as long as he doesn't lose his queen, I think he should be winning. He just needs to avoid losing the queen. So this happens, and let's just say that you go back with bishop f1. So something like rook e3 or rook f3, I guess, is the question mark. Wow. And of course, queen b5, something like rook c3, and right, the bummer is this knight c5 thing is killing us. I still think we're going to find something here. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's look. So, well, that's kind of definitely an interesting situation. No, it's not an easy thing. Yeah, it really isn't. So the interesting thing, one of the interesting things, first of all, actually, it's very interesting. It's very surprising that that black isn't just completely winning after a3, knight a3. If I was black, I would definitely believe in my position quite a lot. So, but rook d3 is an interesting tactical resource that's surprising. That bishop f1, all of a sudden you can't go back to a6 easily. Wait a second, though. There is an answer. I knew there had to be an answer. You play queen a6, and knight c5 is not nearly as scary because of queen a7. Whew, that was hard. So, in general, right, the thought is as long as you don't lose the bishop, your attack will continue, and of course you're up a pawn. Okay, so let's keep going. Queen e4. You should take the draw. Oh man, look at that. That's like, in some ways, you want to admire Paul for fighting on here. Just because it's like a lot of chess players can't take draws because they're just so in love with the game. But Paul, that was a moment to take a draw. You're down a pawn and he's got the initiative. Rook c8, and now he does that to you. And now we can't take the knight. And right, this is lost. Though he does, I went through this again pretty fast. Look, let's just say that from this moment, you got angry, and you started taking him out here, which was great. Let's look at his business again. So rook c8, knight a7, rook f3. Here, I didn't understand that move. I would say, why? Is there a reason he didn't do that? Then you can play bishop a4. I want to trade off the bishop. So a problem that he gets actually in this game is he allows the exchange of his bishop, or of his knight, and then the bishop has trouble opening up the white king. So queen c6 I didn't get, and now he does that. Correct. And now the knight has at least chances of fighting the beast here because you've got good square control. Good. Now this is the anger we want against the French Pole. This is the anger. h5, very good. Very good. And he has some grief just breaking you down here. Very good. Very good. See, this is what happens in the French. Sometimes you just get wailed on, and it happened because Black allowed his initiative to get lost with just the simple looking queen c6, knight b5. Whereas you can imagine if he had a knight instead of the bishop, that knight would be able to do all kinds of things. Okay. I don't know how to evaluate this position, but you definitely have an interesting initiative. You didn't like rook f5. e6 makes sense. As you know, the weird thing about rook f5 is that you're not doing that much yet over there. So, was there something better? e6 looks very plausible. And king b1 is a problem. But our suspicion, I think, is that unless, like before, if you don't get something ASAP here, you are going to be in trouble. So let's backstep a second and ask ourselves, obviously white gave you too much here, but maybe, excuse me, obviously black gave you too much, gave white too much here, but maybe we can make a case for saying that he's still got the juice, because especially this rook is going to do nice defensive work against g7. Yeah, it's interesting. Couldn't we do knight f5? Right? Maybe not, actually. We're about to take a look, but there's a lot of drama after knight f5. If he trades, we're going to say you're fine, right? We're going to say you're fine if he trades. What am I worried about? I'm worried about this. But even here, you have chances for counterplay because his king is still under attack by your vicious knight. In fact, yeah, there's some danger for him here as well. There's really interesting danger. King e6 is met by knight d4, and king g8 has its own problems. Yeah, I don't think you want this. So I think knight f5 is at least the move that you want to consider with a very complicated position. But one where he's got just as much problems as you do. Okay, Paul. Interesting game. And I think for everybody watching, the basic principle needs to be that when you have opposite sides castling, you have to realize that you need to be very exact. Or rather, just this. You always have to be exact. But your perception of the value of what a tempo costs has to go up dramatically. It always costs, the tempos are always important, but with opposite sides castling, they come absolutely vicious. And black gave white at the end here way too much time, beginning with queen c6, to get his own business going. If we go back and just say queen c7, maybe I'm missing something serious here, but there are very basic notions of b5, of bishop a4, where black is just seemingly crushing. Let's say, I don't know, knight d4, and b5, b4 comes to mind immediately. Yeah, which is much quicker than in the game. Okay, good. Let's go on. I think we're on to Isaac now. All right. So this is a position that I've had before myself as white. And let's call this an ancient variation, but one which to my mind has been popularized by Levon Aronian, with the claim that back in the day people thought this was simply equal after knight d7. But now we have to say it's not so easy because of the following idea. queen c4, a6, and I believe it's like queen b3. So that when he plays b5, I'm going to get a4 in before he has an effective way of establishing this whole setup with b5, c5, bishop b7, and say queen out somewhere, maybe b6 to support b5. And I want you to remember this b5, c5 setup, because we're going to see this in a very interesting way in the game. So I recently had this and didn't realize that I was in deep theory here. Now, Isaac writes, I'm not sure if this was a bad move. I thought it was a nice improvisation to unleash my bishop. Knight e5 is definitely not wrong, especially if queen c8. And that was my sense. So let me just tell the story. I was playing some kid, and it was one of those situations like it's an early round, and I was vastly outrating this kid. And he throws this at me, and I just said to myself, this looks weird and just kind of ridiculous. In fact, this is a totally reasonable way for black to play. And then when I was doing the commentary in St. Louis, I saw that Ben Feingold as white got this position against Jan Elvist and also didn't know what to do in this position. Let's say some obvious things. It looks ridiculous for black because it looks like we're giving up the bishops and that this bishop is going to be an absolute beast. Okay, that's at least partly true. But in return, black is going to get a knight on c6, and that knight is really going to look at the d4 square. So, when you look at what the top GMs played here, they have a move here that I would have never considered in a million years. But makes sense if you really go do a deep dive on it, which is queen d3. Looks totally bizarre, right? Knight c6, and the point is when I take now, it's not as easy for you to simply recapture with the queen. If you recapture with the queen, I'm going to do this, and I will claim that I have a small advantage in this ending. It seems weird, right? And I think you won't get it until you kind of see what happens in the game. So, knight d7. White could have waited until knight c6, but honestly, it's not going to make a difference. Like, let's say you castle. And then knight c6, knight d7, we're going to get the same position. Okay, queen d7. And I remember, this presented a real interesting psychological challenge for me as well when I was playing this kid because I felt entitled to an advantage. Look at my beautiful bishop, I said, right? And then the more I looked at it, the more difficult it became for me because black is going to get this incredible central grip with a knight on d4. And here we go. And black's play is simple, and this is not the position that happened with me, but very similar. And kind of hilariously, my opponent also did a similar thing here. Knight b4 is played here. I'm not sure I understand that. In my game, the kid played knight e8 and bishop f6 just to cement this square. Personally, I'm already very worried for white. This space advantage for black is actually pretty severe, and it's difficult to move these pawns without getting a weakness. So already I'd rather be black, and it's funny, right? Because it doesn't seem like white's done anything particularly wrong. And let's dive into Isaac's problems here. And after h3, he writes, I don't know what I was thinking when I played this move, but I can't see a way my opponent can exploit it. Well, one of the weird things about saying exploiting the move is like it's hard to find a plan here, right? So it's very hard to actually do something. Knight b4, let's say, was slightly weird because you left what I consider the powerhouse of the position. But you are still being incredibly annoying by doing this knight trick. Now, my guess is you should have played a3 and then brought your queen back. With maybe you could argue that you're a little bit better here. Maybe. I don't like knight b4, as I said. But this move doesn't do anything with h3. Knight e8. And it's, I think, I want to say this, is that this kid I played, there's some book that the kid read, like some opening book, and I can't remember the exact name. It was like a Greek name. Maybe some, I want to say Mastrovillas or something like that. Anyways, he had read this book, and knight e8, when the kid played it, it seemed really weird to me. But seeing it now, this guy playing knight e8, it's like, oh, this is the plan given in this book, right? This is some book plan, and it's really kind of annoying. Though there the kid played bishop f6. And what's weird to me about this, of course, is that, well, the knight wants to come out. He retraces his steps. I appreciate what Isaac's done with this structure, and let's call it a hedgehog structure, right? Yeah, at this point, I think white is actually fine. I didn't understand h3, but I think this is fine. This move I don't get, though. I think the key to the hedgehog structure is to realize that black has his own psychological pains. And what he did by wasting so much time was he gave you the opportunity to set up this hedgehog structure. And I think what you want to do in this position is just go back and kick it, literally to sit, and see what he does. Because I don't think he wants to do anything violent at the moment. And especially if he opens up the position, then your bishop will truly get angry. Now maybe I'm misunderstanding d4. We're going to look at it. But in general, I think, no, I don't want to play d4. I think if you sit, you can claim to be mildly better in a maneuvering game. This was your intention. Right, and I don't really get it. Because, right, even if we got, like, ED, it's not like we got that much out of it. Bishop f6. It's getting weird to me. It's getting weird. Why wouldn't we take on f6, right? And, wait, yeah, why aren't we taking on f6? At the bare minimum, we could now take on c6 and d4, but I suspect maybe we can do better than that. Yeah, we're doing great here. You have a choice between that or even the two bishop position with, say, ed. You've got two bishops are angry. They're very angry. Even if you lost that pawn on d4, you'd still have great potential with your bishops. So this move I don't get with queen g4. Bishop e7. I'm not sure I get that either. Why did he... Okay, queen e2, d3. There are many things I don't understand. Okay. Why? There's things I don't get. So bishop c3, why can't I take on b3? Something terrible happening to me? Sometimes I'm the one that blunders here. It looks to me, though, like you could take that thing. I wasn't interested in trading rooks, but I realized after I played this move that my pawn was hanging, and trading rooks would have lost his pawn. Right. So knight a5 is interesting looking, but probably a mistake. Let's look at it for a second. Rook takes, queen takes, rook d3, and maybe a way to claim at least initiative for black would be queen c2, with arguably some juice against our queen side. All right, so bishop c3, back, and now he goes for it with b4. Now knight a5. And this is, yeah, and so he finds the idea with queen c2, and really even in an improved version. So let's say that things have gone wrong for you here, Isaac, and backstep just a little bit in terms of some of the weird stuff that happened. Beginning with d4. I didn't get it, though at least there's an interesting idea here with knight e4. I've just got to believe here that black has something better than what he did here. I don't know whether it's queen e7 or what it is, but definitely this move is strange because you could have taken the two bishops here. And then that move is strange because you're allowing him this beautiful pawn. And right, bishop c3 we know to be strange. And the bummer now is you are in grief here. So even if, yeah, I mean, if you can't take the pawn, it's obviously bad news. And let's just say a kind of obvious problem is if you do this, there's the famous intermezzo with rook takes c1 check. Well, let's see if there was any chance to hold this. It looks lost to me. Bishop d4, snip, snip, b3. Yeah, that looks like it should be the end. Oh, there's things I don't understand again. So, yeah, you're fighting. Let's go back a second. I don't know. It didn't seem like it should have been that hard for the guy in this position, because his pawn is further advanced. But let's say some other things. You do have that beautiful pawn, that beautiful a pawn, and his minors on the back rank are funny looking. So let's go through this again. Knight takes, b3, check to the knight. Right, and if you played knight c7, you would have queen d7. So king f8, knight c5, b2, bishop e4. Good move. And very interesting position. Wow, this is pretty spicy. In general, I don't want to play queen c3. But do I have anything that much better? Let's just check for a second. That was it. That was a pawn that I didn't intend. Knight d6. This is obviously very scary because so many things are hanging. There's queen b8. There's queen d7. Both are enough to give heart attacks on multiple levels. Queen b8, like king e7. Check at the very least, right? And then you got to go back. Oh, so I want to take a certain judgment. Maybe I have to take judgments back. It seemed like queen c2. Man, that he had to be better here. Bishop d4. That is pretty amazing that he can survive this. So let's make a claim that he should at least consider this. And then some move like that. Because the knight wants to help on the defense. Still complicated. In any case, you survive this thing. You survive this thing somehow. And your opposite color bishop is really touching the b1 square. Oh man, what a mess. Okay. Oh man, oh man. Jeez. Okay, and I guess we're toast now. Whew! Okay, that whole thing happened, and we're going to say black is going to win. Amazing. And it actually ended up in this business here. All right. Beautiful game, Isaac. And there was some questions in there that were really surprising to me as well. You know, one thing I'm going to say that the 1900s of the world have gotten stronger. There's like people are doing heavy theory, the 1900 2000s of the world, and there's some different difficult positions in here that, at least for me, are very hard to judge, like this one with Queen C2. At first, it felt to me like black should just be doing great. But it's true that there's definitely problems in the black camp. And white's king is safer than black's king. Okay, let's go on. This is the famous Marty in SF. This time he's playing over the bay in Berkeley at the Berkeley Chess Club. I'll call that one of my home clubs of my life. And let me just get something to drink here because it is hot. And Marty submitted several games. Let's take a look. Knight f3, and he makes his first bad move, f5. I think of all openings against d4 and whatever, f5 is the worst. So you heard me there first, Marty. Yeah, I'm not a friend of the f-pawn. However, I will say that it's stronger against knight f3 than d4. After d4, f5, both the bishop f4 systems and that move seem like it's really a bummer for black. How do I do such annotations on chess.com? Now I want to say these aren't what you're seeing actually on the screen there are, so I'm making some variations, but these are all generally things that users have submitted in their games. And one of the great things about this show is that a lot of the content is simply the games and the notes that people submit. And so what I try to do, I'll get rid of this PGN thing so people can see here the whole thing. What I try to do is to show a lot of the notes, but of course you can go and look at the forum where this is held, and you can look at people's notes there as well. And of course I can't talk about every single note. I just try to remember the ones that I found most interesting. But I think a big part of the show that I like, the substance of the show, is people writing in their own annotations. And it's not only interesting for me, but I really do think that that is how people progress in chess. Okay, a couple more questions I want to address here. In so many ways, you can do your annotations either on ChessBase and then bring them in, or simply do them there on the site, on the forum where you enter a game. And we actually had a problem where Vishnu got all of his analysis taken away, and so we're trying to make it a slightly easier way to submit the games, or at least a safer way so you don't lose all your stuff. Lexa says, I mostly play 3-2, so the games are kind of wonky, slugfest, where there isn't much strategy. If I have something interesting, I might consider submitting for reviews. Yeah, in general, I would say, if you are just playing online, that's fine, but try to play some longer games. The last game I'm going to cover today by Ricker, who has submitted mini games, is a game where you get 3 days to do your move. And the danger, of course, there is you're going to worry about somebody looking at the computer for the games, but I've actually seen mini games there where people are playing thoughtfully. And of course, you can do any time control on chess.com that you want. The problem I've had, especially trying to set up training games, is that when I'm on the computer, or anyone's on the computer, it's hard to have the focus that you do in a tournament because the internet is always calling out to you with some distraction, right? Um, yeah. Kirsch Kinchmind is saying has similar issues. What rating level is this game? I think this is about 1900 here. So let's get into it. F5, D4, Bishop G5, and now Knight E4, which is a little bit funny to me. My sense would be that E6 would be the way to go here. But my sense is that Marty wants to do a Leningrad structure, and that's what we're going to get. If you don't know what the Leningrad structure is, that's fine. We're about to see it. Knight E4, Bishop F4, D6. The Leningrad is where you're going to play G6 and Bishop G7. And so this is definitely one of the more spicy ways to play against against white, is to play this Leningrad. It's also very hard to play. If you remember earlier on in the show, we were talking, I believe, about Matt's game, Matt Tripodi, and he had that position where the position was loose, and he fell into grief because the position was loose. When you play the Dutch, and especially the Leningrad, your position, as in this game, will become loose. If I was going to play the Dutch, it would be the stone wall. I think that's what I would do. Unfortunately, if on the straight move order with Bishop G5, I don't think you get the stone wall. And in the variation that white throws against you here, I think you got to go for a stone wall now with E6. And you don't have to. You can also play Bishop E7. But I think the drama is that after Knight E4, you're not really getting what you want. Now, should white have played Knight BD2 or E3? Quite possibly. But anyways, he goes back, D6, Knight BD2. Notice that white's really playing, could be called a London setup, right? And it's very efficient against the Dutch. Very efficient, because you can't really get at the bishop, and the bishop on F4 becomes a pretty good piece. Now, Knight F6, I can't approve. I can't approve of that move. I think you want to look for something else. Let him take, in particular, and you'll get this tempo. So at least the first move to come to mind for me would be Knight D7. Going back can't be a good thing, but neither is this move, Bishop G5, right? He is also giving away tempi. Notice that, this isn't the thing to notice, this is the thing I repeat every month. The problem at the level below 2200 is that people don't respect the tempi enough. And what white is doing with Bishop G5 is, in his mind, he has a setup in mind, right? He has some setup with Bishop G5 that he, has maybe studied before and he quote-unquote feels comfortable with. And so in order to achieve that comfort blanket level of feeling, he's willing to give up a tempo. And we've seen that in a lot of other positions. Okay, G6, Bishop C4, good move. Bishop E6. Kind of a funny move, honestly, Bishop E6, because it's not clear that your bishop is going to be helped by putting the bishop there, right? Now, Knight F8 also seems weird. Why couldn't we play Knight B6, for example? Right? It seems like we're okay there with Knight B6. The bishop's not so scary. But okay, Knight F8, and now I don't like your opponent's move, Bishop F6. I'm going to say at this point that you are probably fine. You could take this way, but your move is fine. And so now you've got this beautiful unopposed bishop on F6, and you should be okay. But your position is still loose. And of course, the thing that needs to be taken care of is this knight that we have endangered. So let's read what you wrote, Marty. After a5, you said, my intention was to trade light square bishops, but I didn't want white to take back with the a pawn. Now, let's think about it a second. Why do we want to trade the bishops so much? I guess because this thing looks scary. It's probably fair. There's some weird things, though. When you play bishop e6, you really are going to encourage this bug house style invasion of your light squares that we're going to see in the game. That really gives me some pause. So, this position, I want to say I believe in your position, but it's gotten to a point where it feels kind of freaky to me, and you're a little bit loose. Now, what should you do? My gut is that you should play something like e5. This is the dream of the Leningrad anyway, and the idea is less to like murder white immediately and more to get a square for your queen. A more conservative way to play would be e6 and queen e7, but of course, you don't have squares for this guy in particular. But one dream that knight could have is to maybe someday play g5. So this thing that you do here with bishop e6, right, it feels very scary and loose to me. Yeah. All right. He could consider other things besides taking, by the way, such as knight c4, and I like his position there as well. Notice that now with a5, the dreams of castling long for you have also gone down quite a bit. So, right, this is a very dangerous position now, where your pieces are truly cramped. Okay, the guy plays bishop c4. I'm not sure I get it. Maybe he is motivated by saying to himself something like, well, if bishop b2, I've got rook b1. The obvious move to me would be knight d4. Very bughouse-like. I don't want to stick the knight on e6 necessarily. I just want to prevent you from moving and, get my doggies out. Right? Very simple chess. I'm going to play for mate eventually. Might do h4, h5, might just castle, might play for e4. All kinds of ideas here for white. Anyways, bishop c4, queen c8. I'm not sure I get that either. If you want to play c6 like you end up doing, you should just do it now. Just play c6 now. Queen c8, knight d4, good move, c6, alright. So white should definitely be on top, but he has to be clever about it. DC, I don't know. Let's look at the variation you give. Queen f3, knight d7, snip. That is complicated. That is very complicated. Hold on. I don't know if that was a computer variation or what, but knight d7 is correct. We have to fix the knight, and if nothing else, white shouldn't play queen f3 if that's what's going to happen. He could honestly consider sacking the pawn as well. But yeah, as long as the knight gets in, white shouldn't want it. So snip, snip. It's funny actually, arguably the king is helped by going to f7, right? So white, a simpler move might have been just to castle short here. Yeah, castle short for white. Knight d7, good move, covering this square. So here we have this incredibly loose situation now. And again, it's about the tempi here. White needs to come at black with all the ferocity that he can muster. And if he didn't want to think, then I think castle should be the move. If he wanted to think though, he could consider Harry the h-pawn with h4. c3, what he does, right? It's like he is thinking about the pawn on b2. So everybody listening, hear me. Pawns aren't people, and they're especially not people in a position like this where everything is loose for black, right? Everything is loose. d5, good move. e5, okay. In principle, good. Now notice that white is still maybe better, but his knights have problems. Would have been nice not to have given away the c3 tempo, right? Knight c5. I like it. Queen a6, I like it. Knight c1, I really don't like it. White needs a better plan here, and it's honestly already not so easy. But in general, he should be thinking about creating some kind of blockade with f4 to gain this square. It's already not simple though, because you've got this beautiful invasion point. And let's just say that, look, we have a very complicated position here, and white is the one who really lets things slip with this move c3. You can imagine in his mind he's saying things to himself about being solid, about blocking the bishop, all these stories, but the bigger story is there's a loose king, and white has conceivable stories of compensation himself, as we see in the game, with the center pawns becoming strong, and in particular, the center pawns dominating the knights, right? So, c3, d5, e5, very nice, knight c5, very nice, queen a6, very nice, knight c1, it just can't be right. That also can't be right, and I really like your next move here. This next move people should appreciate. On the show, I've talked a lot about space, right? And let me turn off the air conditioner for the beautiful space god. Space is a thing which is very hard to play with, but it's fundamentally one of the most important things about chess, especially, let's say, modern chess, and one of the things, too, that AlphaZero and the other computers have basically taught us. While I was in St. Louis the time before this, I got a chance to hang out with Gawain Jones, and we were playing this beautiful two-handed chess thing, where I make a move and then there's two other people and you have to trade off making moves, and we're trading off moves. And, I got us to play the French and stuff, and of course he hated it. And the comment that he made, though, was interesting, was that nowadays people don't want to play without space, and that's, of course, the problem with a thing like the French. And, of course, it's an even bigger problem in a position like this. And my rant here, to appreciate the beauty of this simple move, knight e6, is that when your opponent has left space, you do not want to trade, right? And so when you think about it, with a move like knight e6, you're not exactly sure what's going to happen next, right? All you know is that your pieces are beautiful and white's are terrible. So, you're not even doing any hectic calculations when we play this move. It might have even been possible to win a pawn with knight b3, and like queen b6 or something. But his position's so terrible that there's no need to do that. Marty gives a variation with knight e4, but I like knight e6. I think you're positionally winning here, so you shouldn't worry about it. Rook a2. And Marty says, this feels like it can't be good, but I didn't see an immediate way to capitalize. So maybe I'm missing something here, but instead of rook hd8, why not just double on the b file? Isn't that going to be the end? When I double like that, I'm not just interested in winning the pawn either. I want to put incredible pressure on the knight and make it so, the knights have trouble moving. Yeah, I think that moves. It's hard to imagine white surviving after that. So rook hd8, queen c2. Now it's getting weird, Marty. I don't know what you're doing. So the last two moves, they say mistakes come in pairs. The last two moves I don't get. And actually, I guess I could say I get bishop e7 because clearly you're intending knight c7. But I don't know why you want knight c7. Maybe I get it now. You want to play... okay, let's talk about this. Marty, 30 lashes. This is an important one to understand. Your pawns in the center, the reason your pawns in the center are so beautiful is because they are dominating the white pieces. What you now start, the next plan, is a big old path to play c5. And what you're going to be willing to do is to really discomfort your own pieces in order to achieve this c5 break. But what I want you to see is none of white's pieces actually become more worse than they already are after c5, right? If anything, it gives him maybe some chances, some counter chances to strike back, right? So again, I think you should double on the b file. Improve your positions. Your center is fantastic the way it is. Or as we say nowadays, you're beautiful the way you are, Marty. You don't have to do anything here. So right, when I first saw this, I didn't get it, but now I get it. Marty is obsessed with playing c5. Knight d3, king f6, and that's true obsession. Now look at that. Oh, and now Marty does a terrible thing. He takes it. Oh no! And now things are beginning to get really murky because our king is also funny. Marty writes better was queen b6, and that's definitely true, though we're going to have to worry about b4. It is true, black could win a pawn by kicking and then taking this thing, but the position has become so loose for black that I'm getting worried, right? And there's no reason I should be worried, but let me just show you an example. e4 takes, and oh, maybe I was getting too fancy for myself. I was thinking knight d7 was going to work. Maybe it doesn't, though. Okay, I could do this. I could play... Actually, I don't know. Some kind of thing like this is making me very nervous with a knight d5 next. I don't know if that actually works, Marty. I'm just saying I'm nervous. Like, I guess you're going to have to do queen d6, knight d5. You actually are surviving this because my rook is pinned. All right. So it's a better move, but look at that b4. Oh, it makes me real nervous. Real nervous. F. And then you got to... Let's look at it again. It makes me so nervous. This king is out in the open in a way that I don't like. Maybe you're not totally lost. Hold on. A simpler way to play for white actually would be to play here, snip, snap, snop, and knight b3. And that way I maintain my blockade. Yeah, and you can see here it's hard to say who's better because the queen is going to come at some point to b2. You've got to worry about things like a5, and white should be thinking about fixing his own king with simple moves like g3. And all this shouldn't happen, right? Because we should be winning already. Instead, things have gotten mighty complicated. Now, let's look. Queen c4, snip, snip, rook b4, right. a5, snip, b8, and he has at least some counterplay here. Yeah. And now, of course, white could play knight c6, as you note, and be at least close to equal, or probably just equal. Instead, we get these horrendous series of businesses, and let's say now that we have an interesting position, Marty, where you are going for it against the white king, and it's a nice example of where the knights and rooks can become very powerful against the king, and even powerful in a way that could be called a mating attack. Let me just look here for a second about this rook f1. It felt to me, after looking at the game, that we should be playing rook b2 first, just so that our king will have the exit square c5 if it needs it, because the knight has to go somewhere, let's call it inappropriate, right? So knight c3, check, and that's a little bit uncomfortable now for our king, right? Knight f2, check, and you give king c8 as probably winning. Let's make sure, but it's already more complicated than we want, right? And then we're out, right? I think we're out. We're gonna escape. Okay. So king d8, knight c5, check, check everywhere, and we got to go back. Good fighting move. And now he blows it with knight b3. And indeed, he needs to give a check on b7. And that's an evil move. Rook fe2, very nice. And we will get knight f2. Knight f2 mate, of course, is the problem. My sensei, Vasily Smyslov, said, and this applies very much to this position, that the rook and knight are an incredible attacking combination in the endgame. And the simple reason is that they can cover both colors of squares. And you see that here with this dancing knight taking all the squares away from the white king, where a lot of people don't appreciate how powerful the knight and rook attack in the endgame can be. They're thinking, in fact, let's just bring this back to Vishnu's game for a second and say that a lot of times in the endgame, and this was definitely true of my first decades of chess, was people are thinking about pawns, and they're thinking about grabbing pawns and promoting pawns. But the king activity and the attack against the king is something that's learned a little later, and this is a nice example of it. Okay. I'm just reading Kinchmein's notes, which I assume is Marty. Right. It was a nervous position, definitely. Well, good game, Marty. I felt like that was a really exciting game. Very exciting game. And as long as you play f5 only against knight f3, I think that's okay. All right, we got two more games to cover. Let's see if we can get there. First, we got Tim. Tim is playing in a simul here. Let's switch it against the famous Niels. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Niels Grandelius in Scandinavia here. And they get this seemingly boring position. And black has done well to get this position, which we're going to call close to equal. If white has something, it's pretty small. Now, the first thing to note is there is a dirty, rotten threat here with bishop h7 followed by knight g5. Okay, so bishop g6, knight h4. Okay, now, this is an interesting position where it looks on the surface like it's pretty tame. But you'll see that in just a couple moves, black is in big trouble. So let's look first what he did, and we'll come back maybe to this position. He plays snip, snip, and now allows the knight to f5. And once that knight gets to f5, I think we have to say that white has a very strong attacking position, at the very least dangerous. So, let's go back a second and consider this position after knight h4. I think that if you're going to take this thing, you need to play g6. Keep the knight out of f5. If you don't like this for whatever reason, I think the way to play would be just to play knight d7. Let him be proud of his bishops and say that your position is fundamentally totally strong here, right? Very tough to crack. You can argue that he's a little bit better, but he also has the split pawn. So this would be your options, right? Either this one, I think, or that one with g6. The one with g6 is more ambitious in the sense that white is going to try to do... White has to... It's provocative, because if white finds nothing here to put pressure on you, then obviously you are going to be better, right? The simple, obvious plans for him to consider would be things like queen d2 and knight f3. Back to, like queen h6 and knight g5. But maybe, to get some fancy knight f5 in. In any case, those were the options. As it was, let's look at how fast this went downhill. Knight f5, b6. So, queen f3, good move. Knight f6, bishop g5. And now, the game falls apart very quickly. But it's already difficult, and yeah, it is already very difficult. Let's first show what happened to poor Tim. Bishop e7, and then whack. Now, I want to stress that even if white didn't have that move, we really have to say that it's already very pleasant for white. One of these rooks to the center, for example, is going to be a real pain to me. But there you go. The GM finds it in the symbol, and it's already, really toast. And yeah, black gave up because he's losing this poor rook. Okay, Tim, I know that you've been playing some good games. You send us some more. You always send us some game where things go dire for you. They go dire. But that game, I felt you can... What I want you to see about that is a good example, actually, of the value of sometimes playing something like a simul. And you can see how white put some interesting pressure on you with this knight h4 move, and you didn't know how to deal with it. And that created the pressure that got you to crack with allowing queen takes c6. And if you want to beat yourself up at any point, it's this move here, bishop e7. Because even if you don't see queen takes c6, it's leading to a position of such incredible passivity, right, that you don't want any part of it. And of course, you didn't have to play knight f6 either. So you're worse here, but you're not lost. And, you could consider... there's just varieties of suffering now. One variety could be just to play g6, for example. And, you're going to suffer no matter what, but I don't think you're lost. Okay, let's look at the famous Ricker's game. So this is one of these 3 days of move game, and I want to say, first of all, I love the handle of Ricker's opponent, Philodorable. And Ricker, I want to say, has really improved. As Ricker is an older guy like me who's trying to improve later in life, and it's very difficult. But definitely his openings have gotten much better. And what I mean openings, I don't mean like studying theory or anything. I just mean the basics of opening fundamentals. And a lot of times, even the games we've looked at today, I feel like people would be better served not knowing the theory and instead just playing what they feel is the correct opening fundamental move. And his tactics have gotten better. When he was first submitting games, he was losing to dramatic tactical losses. Now, this is an interesting position. Back in the day, the reason that people said this move was wrong was because of CD, CD, Queen B3. And the issue is that it's hard to defend everything. If Queen B6, there's Knight D5. You can. I had in mini blitz games somebody do this to me, Bishop C8, which then feels like an improved exchange Slav. And I think there might be some newfangled ideas with Knight C6. Don't quote me on that. There might be some new ideas. In any case, after E3, one of the problems that you're going to get here, Ricker, is that black is now going to have enough time to get all his pieces settled. Now, with that said, H6 was also a mistake. Because now after H6, you can do the same thing and get simply the same position up a tempo. Right? Notice that any kind of Queen D7 is going to run into Knight E5. So now E3 is not a bad move. We're just going to get this position E6, which is a pretty well-known deal. And I think I'd say Kramnik in the early 2000s kind of popularized this way of playing for white, where you can play Knight H4 and claim that maybe your bishop is going to be beautiful, though it's a very hectic position, for example, in something like this. And white's tried all kinds of moves like H3 and G3 and yada yada. In any case, H6 was definitely a loss of time. And what is he thinking? He's thinking to himself, well, I don't want to deal with that Knight H4 business, so I'm going to play H6 first, but he's neglecting his business, and CD, of course, is an improved version, as we said. So you just take it easy, fine. And here I think the difficulty that you're having in this position is it's difficult for you to find a plan here, and you're not the first to suffer as to what to do in a position like this, because black's pieces seem settled and it's hard to find a way to poke them, right? In general, the reason this move C5 is generally frowned upon is because you are releasing your tension in the center, and this is going to allow black to play E5 later with some initiative. Now, that said, it might not be that bad, so let's continue, because at least here you have a plan, right, of expanding on the queen side. So, because of that, you should expand. You should do your B5 business, or A4, one of those. You've committed over there. And one reason why this is a mistake with H3 is that that is your weak side of the board, right? He's going to play for E5. So this move isn't helping. And what it feels like, right, is that with H3, you don't know what to do, right, in this position. You mentioned Knight E5, and that is in fact a pretty interesting move that I don't quite know how to evaluate. My sense is that black should be at least fine after doing some kind of trades like this, but it's at least interesting. Right. As it was, he gets Knight D7, and now it's really hard for you to do stuff. But now, Ricker, 30,000 lashes for your next move. Knight H4, because all you're doing is you're helping his bishop go where he wants to go. And then F4 is like, ah. Oh. I get it. You wanted to control E5. So there is at least sense in what you're doing. Knight E4. And now another strange move. Very strange move. You played G3. Of course your knight needs to come back. Right? Of course it has to come back. It's terrible on Knight H4. Yeah, gotta go back. In this position, gotta like black still. He has simple plans of playing F6 and E5 to bust you open, but you're definitely not lost. This move, though, G3, certainly has to be an example of a situation where we say that pawns can't move backwards, right? Okay, I'm not thrilled with Knight F6. I think he should be thinking of something more violent, like g5 or f6, e5, one of those moves. And he's giving you some time doing this business. But we need, in our own course, to do something, and we didn't, right? So it's funny that too, that notice that what you did when you played knight h3 is you admitted the mistake of g3, right? Because you didn't need to play g3, and now you're going to have to tend to it like that. So let's imagine, is there a better move than queen e1? I get it, you're afraid of knight c3. So yeah, let's play bishop d3. Yeah. And look, one reason of bishop d3 is not only to prevent knight c3, but eventually I want to put my rook here and I want to play b5 because I must, I repeat, must get something going on the queen side before he murders me on the king side. It will happen if I give him enough time. b6, okay. Snip. And this move, Ricker, this move I don't understand at all. You got to take the pawn back because it's a big pawn. It allows him, you know, this pawn gives him all kinds of ways to open the position now, which he dutifully does. Very nice, right? Very nice, simple move. Snap. And here's funny, actually. You resign, but I guess we need to clarify why, right? Why did you resign here? Honestly, I got some befuddle in my buttle. I got some befuddle here. Wait a second, what's going on? If you guys are into carnage, I am a master chess player. I don't understand anything here, Ricker. So the guy's got a great position here. There's no question about it. The knight's centralized. His rooks are beautiful. A move that comes to mind for him would be something like g5. It's a little violent. Maybe he doesn't need to do that. In any case, he should be able to find something here. This move he should only do if he is crushing you. But why? Am I missing something here? Am I like misunderstanding? I guess, I mean, it's weird that you resign because, okay, he does this, and I guess it is the end. It is the end. I get it, Ricker. I get it. Let's review just a couple things, and then I'll wrap this show up. You are not, at every level of chess, even the Super GM level, bad moves are often simply happening because people don't know what to do. And so they end up doing something they regret. And in this position, I get it. It's very hard to know exactly what to do. There's things like b3, bishop b2 makes a lot of sense, for example. And it's just a roughly equal position where you're shadow boxing for a while. So c5, b4, and h3 is your next mistake, right? It's about time and it's about committing to a plan. You either commit to this thing or you commit to something like this. Yeah. And this one, again, pretty hokey, but the main one that I want you to pay attention to is g3, right? Really losing a lot of time and creating a situation where your pawns are going to feel regret because they cannot move backwards. Paul in New Jersey says, what about bishop f4 in the very end? That I was looking at that too, but I couldn't see a way of exactly what was going to happen after king f4. There might be something, but I didn't see it immediately. But rook a e8 seems much simpler because you got to take the thing and then we're going to win the bishop. All right, everybody. beautiful time today, and I will be back next month. We'll post the thread hopefully soon. Same time, I'll just say, let's say tentatively, I'll give a tentative announcement here. We will be on the air on the 28th of August at the same time. So generally the last Wednesday of the month. Beautiful games today. I really appreciate, we had the beautiful Smith-Morra game from Luke, and Vishnu's game I thought was really interesting. Also, just from a standpoint of personal reflection, it was interesting to me that I had a similar problem in my own chess history, a similar awakening that I had to go for. All right, everybody. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.